At the graduation ceremony of a prestigious law school, a young black woman is introduced to her boyfriend's family for the first time. But instead of congratulating her, they look down on her, mock her skin color, and dismiss all her hard work. The next day, they invite her to dinner at an upscale restaurant and continue to make cruel, condescending remarks. But they'll soon regret it when they find out the woman sitting across from them is the valedictorian and one of the most sought-after young lawyers in the country. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. It was a bright spring morning on the campus of Harper Law, the kind of day where the breeze carried whispers of promise. The sun filtered through the tall oak trees lining the brick pathways, and the ivy-covered buildings stood like quiet witnesses to generations of ambition. Students buzzed with excitement, their Navy graduation robes rippling like sails in the wind. And in the center of it all stood Amira Bennett. Amira Bennett stood at the edge of the fountain in Harper Law's courtyard, her eyes following the drifting petals of a cherry blossom that had fallen onto the water. Her high bun, neat, elegant, held with practiced grace, caught the late spring light, and her deep brown skin seemed to glow beneath the soft sun. Her tailored navy dress fit snug under her graduation gown, the perfect mix of professionalism and pride. She adjusted the note cards in her hand and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would speak before a crowd of nearly 2,000. Her voice would echo across the ivy-lined arches of Harper's main auditorium. She wasn't just any graduate, she was valedictorian, top of her class, full scholarship recipient, first in, last out, always proving, always earning. Because for someone like her, a young black woman from the south end of Boston, being great wasn't enough. She had to be extraordinary just to be seen as enough. Across the green, her boyfriend Marcus Fairchild approached. He cut a familiar figure, tall, light hair neatly combed his steps, long and confident, but his eyes softened as they landed on her. The son of Massachusetts political royalty, Marcus was everything you'd expect from a Fairchild, well-educated, well-spoken, always composed. But when it came to Amira, he often forgot the rules he'd been raised with. Around her, he wasn't the golden boy. He was just a man in love. "God, you look incredible," he said, wrapping her in a quick, warm hug. The scent of his cologne, a subtle blend of cedar and something citrusy, lingered for a moment. "You're late," she teased, taking the flowers. He kissed her cheek. "Traffic and nerves. Your speech tomorrow? I still can't believe I get to say I'm dating the valedictorian." She raised a brow. "You say that like it's not a daily miracle." Marcus laughed, slipping his hand into hers. "I mean it. I'm proud of you, Amira. Everyone is. I overheard 3 professors arguing about which of them discovered you." She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. As they walked toward the main lawn, classmates waved and called out to them. "Power couple," someone shouted. "Future SCOTUS right there," another said. People noticed them, beautiful, driven clearly in love. They were the couple you saw and couldn't help but admire. But admiration has its limits, and sometimes it stops at skin. The next afternoon, the graduation festivities were in full swing. Strings of white lights draped across the quad, a jazz trio played softly under a tent, and navy-robed graduates mingled with proud families. Amira was scheduled to speak in less than an hour, but first she had to survive the part she'd been dreading. Meeting Marcus's family. Amira had Googled them once, just once. Dozens of articles came up. His father, Senator Gerald Fairchild, had been in office for 2 decades. His mother, Vivian, chaired 2 national education boards and was often photographed attending fundraisers in pearl earrings and cream-colored dresses. And Camille, Marcus's older sister, was a corporate attorney known for her biting cross-examinations and even sharper wardrobe. Amira tucked her speech cards deeper into her gown's pocket. Marcus noticed her stiffening. "They're excited to meet you," he said gently. "Really?" She raised an eyebrow. "Are they?" He paused. "They don't know you yet, but once they hear your speech, they'll get it. They'll see what I see." What he saw. That meant something. Still, Amira knew too well that there were people in this world who could listen to every brilliant word she said and still only hear the echo of their own prejudice. "Just be yourself," he added. "You're amazing." Marcus squeezed her hand as they approached the north side of the lawn, where 3 impeccably dressed individuals stood beneath a white gazebo. The woman in the center wore a cream-colored silk blouse and pearl earrings. Her posture was impossibly straight. Beside her, a tall man in a gray suit adjusted his cufflinks. Next to him stood a younger woman, elegant stern, clutching a designer purse and scrolling her phone without interest. Vivian Fairchild looked up as Marcus and Amira approached. Her smile was sharp polished. "Marcus, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. Her gaze drifted to Amira. "And you must be Amira." Amira extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Fairchild." Vivian smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "So lovely to finally meet you," she said. Her voice was smooth as silk and twice as cold. She offered a hand, limp quick. It grazed Amira's fingers like a whisper of disdain. "Congratulations," she added. "Marcus says you're valedictorian." "That's quite something." Amira nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Fairchild. It means a lot." Vivian's smile didn't waver. "Full scholarship, too." "Yes, one of those diversity opportunities. I imagine the words weren't loud, but they sliced. The implication was clear. Amira's achievements weren't because of merit, but because of skin color. Amira's jaw tightened. She had heard it before, said more plainly, by people less clever. Gerald gave her a brief nod. "Law school's not easy," he said, voice low and even. "You must have worked hard to keep up. Keep up, not excel, not lead, just keep up." Marcus opened his mouth, but Amira gently touched his arm. She wasn't new to this. She forced a smile. "I didn't just keep up, I led. Top of my class." Camille, Marcus's sister, looked up from her phone and scanned Amira from head to toe. "That dress is bold," she said. "Definitely stands out. Must have taken confidence to wear something like that today." Amira glanced down at her deep plum silk dress. It hugged her figure modestly, professional, stylish. She'd chosen it intentionally to honor her late grandmother, who always told her, "Dress like you already belong in the room." "I wanted to celebrate the moment," Amira said calmly. Vivian tilted her head. "Of course. A very vibrant choice." Camille tucked her phone away. "Well, Marcus has always had an eye for unique people." Marcus tensed. "Camille." She just raised an eyebrow. Amira could feel the heat creeping up her neck. She wasn't new to this kind of conversation. It was the way some people smiled when they said, "You're so articulate." It was compliments lined with barbs, silk gloves hiding brass knuckles. The crowd around them began moving toward the auditorium. Faculty called out names, cameras flashed, laughter echoed. "We should get inside," Gerald said, already turning. Vivian looped her arm through her husband's. "Yes, let's get good seats for Marcus's big moment." Marcus looked to Amira. She caught the hesitation in his eyes. He'd heard the tone. He felt it. But he didn't speak. She walked beside him in silence. They entered the hall, the vaulted ceiling high above them, chandeliers casting soft light over polished wood. Rows of chairs filled quickly. Amira was guided backstage while Marcus and his family took their place up front. She stood behind the curtain, gripping her note cards. This was her day, her moment, and yet already it felt like someone had tried to take it from her. She remembered her mother's words spoken the night before over a cracked phone speaker. "They don't get to define you, baby. You've already written your name in ink." Amira closed her eyes. The crowd quieted. The soft hush of the auditorium felt like a held breath. Every seat in the Harper Law main hall was taken. Faculty in black robes sat in the first two rows, their expressions proud and expectant. Cameras clicked, parents stood in the back, some wiping tears before the ceremony even began. Amira stood just off stage, hands folded around her note cards, trying to steady her breathing. The fabric of her gown pressed lightly against her chest, and she could feel the slight thump of her pulse at her collarbone. The murmurs in the crowd faded as Dean Wallace stepped up to the microphone. "It is my great honor," he said, "to introduce this year's valedictorian. A scholar, an advocate, a symbol of what justice looks like when earned through sweat and purpose, Miss Amira Bennett." Thunderous applause broke out. Amira took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and stepped into the spotlight. Her heels clicked across the polished wooden floor, the sound oddly grounding. She reached the podium, looked out across the room, and found Marcus sitting in the middle of the front row. He smiled and gave her a small nod, his eyes steady. She saw his parents sitting beside him, Vivian rigid and perfectly poised, her lips tight. Gerald sat still, his arms crossed. Camille was checking her phone under the table. She didn't need to prove herself to the Fairchilds, but she would make sure they never forgot her name. Amira looked away. She began. "When I was 10 years old, I watched my mother argue with a landlord about a leaking ceiling. He told her, 'You people never stop complaining.' I didn't know what he meant by 'you people,' but I knew how it made her shrink." She paused. The room was completely silent. I promised myself that day I would never let anyone make her or anyone like her feel small again. Her voice was steady, deep, full. That's what law became to me. Not a degree, not prestige, but a promise. She glanced back down at her note cards, but didn't need them. Justice doesn't choose its warriors based on where they come from or what they look like. Justice doesn't care about skin tone. Justice doesn't care about last names. She let her words hang in the air, then looked directly toward the Fairchilds. Justice doesn't pick favorites. It only honors the truth. The audience erupted. Applause filled the room like a rising tide. Some students stood first, then faculty, then almost the entire auditorium, except the Fairchilds. Vivian remained seated, arms crossed over her lap, a polite smile frozen on her face. Gerald sat like a statue. Camille glanced up from her phone and clapped twice, then returned to whatever she was doing. Amira kept smiling, but her stomach turned. She stepped down from the podium to a flurry of handshakes, hugs, and congratulations. Professors pulled her aside, thanking her for her words. A classmate whispered, "You said everything I've wanted to say since first year." Another girl hugged her tightly and didn't say anything she didn't need to. But Amira's eyes kept drifting to Marcus. He waited by the edge of the stage, tall shoulders, square eyes on her with pride. He reached for her hand the moment she was close enough. "You were incredible," he said. "Thanks," she said, but her voice came out quieter than she intended. He leaned in. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gave his hand a squeeze and tried to stay in the glow just a little longer, but the glow didn't last. 15 minutes later, as people gathered for photos beneath the marble columns outside Marcus's family congregated near the ivy wall. Vivian was fixing her hair in a compact mirror. Gerald stood with one hand on his phone, eyes scanning the crowd. Camille was taking selfies with a bored expression. Marcus approached them with Amira beside him. "Let's grab a few pictures," he said. Vivian smiled, her voice light. "Of course, let's do one of just the family first, darling." Marcus turned toward Amira. "Come on," Vivian's voice cut in. "No, just the family for now. Then we'll get one with your friend." Amira's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Friend Marcus hesitated. She's not just a friend, Mom." Vivian didn't respond. She simply turned toward the photographer and posed, motioning to Gerald and Camille. Camille gave Amira a quick glance, then shrugged. "You can take one after, maybe with your classmates." The photographer snapped a few shots. Flash, pose, flash, smile. Amira stood 5 feet away. She folded her arms, her eyes unreadable. Marcus looked at her, visibly torn. When the photographer finally turned to her and asked, "Would you like to join in?" Vivian spoke before anyone else could. "We're fine. We just wanted one for the family album." Amira's probably got tons of pictures to take with her professors and classmates anyway. That last word stung more than it should have. Professors, classmates, not family, not ours. Amira forced a smile. "It's fine, I'll wait." Inside, she didn't feel fine. She felt like a cardboard cutout someone had placed on a stage and clapped for, then left behind once the lights dimmed. She had just delivered the most important speech of her life. She had earned the top spot in her class. She had lifted an entire room with her words. And still, in the eyes of this family, she was someone to be left out of the photo, an accessory that didn't match. She took a step back, turned slightly, and let herself breathe. Marcus joined her a moment later, face clouded. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I didn't know they'd do that." She stared at him. "Didn't you?" He looked away. "They don't think I belong with you," she continued. "They think I'm a phase. Or a diversity story that went too far." He shook his head. "That's not true, but they believe it." Marcus didn't argue. He knew she was right. And Amira didn't cry. Not in front of them. Not when she'd come this far. Instead, she stood tall, her shoulders square beneath her gown. Her fingers clutched the edges of her diploma case like a lifeline. The burn in her chest wasn't sadness. It was anger. Quiet, heavy, unresolved anger. It wasn't just the insult of being left out of a picture. It was what it represented. People don't exclude you from photos because they forgot. They do it to make something clear. You're not one of us. You're not part of this family. You're here because he chose you. But we didn't. And in that moment, Amira understood something that she had sensed since the beginning of their relationship, but never quite voiced. No matter how much Marcus loved her, no matter how hard she worked or how high she climbed, there would always be people who saw her as temporary, as someone who didn't fit the mold. She wasn't angry at Marcus, not entirely, but she needed him to see it, to name it, to stop pretending it wasn't there. She looked up at him. "You don't have to pick sides today," as she said, "but one day, you will." And with that, she turned and walked away. She walked past the camera flashes, the congratulatory hugs, the proud parents, and teary-eyed graduates, because she had something they couldn't touch. She had the truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone frame her out of her own story. The restaurant shimmered in low candlelight with gold trim on the ceilings and white linen on every table. Ornette's was the kind of place you didn't just dine at, you were seen at. The walls held black and white photos of senators, CEOs, and judges who had once eaten rack of lamb and debated legacy and power between sips of wine. Everything about the place whispered wealth, tradition, and pedigree. Amira sat straight in her chair, napkin folded in her lap, eyes steady as she scanned the table. To her right sat Marcus, his hand resting lightly against hers beneath the table. Across from them sat Vivian and Gerald Fairchild, dressed as though this were a diplomatic summit. Camille arrived last, sliding into her seat with a glance at her phone and a neutral nod to Amira. The waiter poured sparkling water into crystal glasses and disappeared like a shadow. Marcus leaned toward Amira with a soft smile. "You doing okay? I've been through worse," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Vivian set down her menu and looked across the table. "Amira," she began, her voice silky, "we're so glad you could join us. This place is special to our family. Marcus's father proposed to me right there in that corner booth." Gerald gave a faint nod. "We've celebrated every major milestone here." Amira nodded politely. "It's beautiful." Vivian glanced at the menu again. "And expensive," she added with a light chuckle. There it was, the first jab. Not sharp, not loud, just a quiet reminder of status, of cost, of who could afford what without blinking. Amira kept her tone warm. "Well, tonight certainly qualifies as a milestone." "Indeed," Gerald said. "Graduating top of your class is no small thing. And law school isn't exactly a walk in the park." "No, it's not," Amira replied. "But when you know what's at stake, you push through." Camille looked up, stirring her glass with her straw. "You mentioned public interest law, right? That's your plan." "Yes," Amira said. "I've accepted a position with a housing justice nonprofit. We provide legal defense for tenants, an advocate for fair housing policy." Camille's brows lifted, feigning curiosity. "Noble. But I imagine it doesn't pay much, does it?" Vivian chimed in, smiling sweetly. "It's a passion job, dear. Not everyone goes into law to, build wealth." Marcus stiffened beside her. Amira took a sip of water and placed her glass down with care. "It's not about wealth for me. It's about impact. My parents worked their entire lives so I could have this opportunity. Helping others keep their homes feels like the right way to honor that." Camille gave a nod. "Of course. But long-term, don't you think sustainability matters? I mean, Marcus has a lifestyle he's used to. You'd want to match that, wouldn't you?" Amira looked directly at her, her expression calm. "I think a shared future is built on values, not bank accounts." Marcus cleared his throat. "We've talked about this. Amira's work is important, and we're aligned." Vivian set her menu down. "Speaking of alignment, Marcus," she said, her voice light, "I saw that Lila Montgomery will be speaking at the Bar Association event next month. Do you remember Lila, her father's with the Chamber of Commerce?" Marcus frowned. "Lila and I went to prep school. That was years ago. She went to Yale Law. Top firm. Very polished. She'll make partners soon, I'm sure." The table fell silent. Amira didn't flinch. She didn't need a translator to understand what Vivian meant. Lila was the kind of girl the Fairchilds expected, white-polished, wealthy, connected. The kind who didn't have to fight for a seat at the table because the table was built for her. Marcus's voice was tight. "I don't think this is the time to talk about other women, Mom." Vivian waved a hand. "Oh, I'm just saying it's nice to know what's out there. That's all." Amira didn't speak. Her hand remained still on her lap, her eyes focused. Her pulse ticked faster, but her face didn't show it. Gerald jumped in next, as if trying to steer the conversation into something neutral. "So, Amira, South End of Boston, right? That's where you grew up, I did," she answered. "Interesting area. Vibrant. Diverse." Vivian added, "Yes, very lively. A lot happening. I hear it's evolving." Amira's voice remained even. "It's where I learned how to speak up. Where I watched neighbors help each other even when they had nothing. I wouldn't trade it for anywhere else." "That's admirable," Camille said. "But it must have been hard. Not many from there make it to places like Harper. The message was always the same, just dressed in different clothes. You're the exception. You're not from here. You don't really belong." Amira looked directly at her. "A lot of people from South End are brilliant. They just don't get the same doors open for them." Marcus leaned forward. "Maybe we could talk about something else." Vivian smiled thinly. "We're just trying to understand the woman our son's so invested in. That's all," Mom Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. Vivian held up a hand. "I'm just saying it's important to be realistic." Realistic. That word again. Polite racism didn't shout. It didn't curse. It sipped wine, kept perfect posture, and smiled while undermining you. Amira knew this type well. She had argued against it in classrooms, written papers dissecting it, and now she sat face to face with it at a white linen table. Camille changed course. "What about kids? Do you want them?" Amira raised an eyebrow. "Eventually." Marcus always said he wanted to raise his kids the way he was raised, Vivian said softly. "Structure, private schools, travel, legacy." Amira nodded. "I want my children to know who they are, and that means honoring both sides of their story." The words hung there, clear, undeniable. Gerald's expression didn't change. Camille went back to her phone. Vivian lifted her wine glass again, swirling the contents slowly. "Tell me, Amira," Vivian said, "your parents, what do they do?" "My mother's a librarian. My father's a retired transit mechanic." "Hard-working people," Vivian said, pausing. "Different world from the one Marcus comes from." Marcus sat back, jaw clenched. "They're good people," Amira said. "They taught me how to fix what's broken, how to stand my ground, how to build something from nothing." Vivian tilted her head. "That explains your drive, but compatibility is more than ambition. It's shared expectations." Amira smiled slightly. "And expectations can change. With the right partner." Gerald raised his glass. "To expectations, then." Camille forced a smile. "To bold life choices." Amira didn't lift her glass. She'd had enough toast to assumptions for one evening. She looked at Marcus. He hadn't spoken in minutes. His face was tight gaze downward. He reached for her hand under the table, fingers brushing hers. But Amira didn't move. The silence between them said more than words. This wasn't a dinner. It was a test. And every polite insult, every name drop, every subtle dig had been part of the exam. They didn't want to know her. They wanted to prove she wasn't right for him. Amira sat there, napkin still in her lap, posture perfect. She was not going to break. She was not going to explain her worth. Not to people who had already decided she didn't have any. And as the next course arrived, served on silver dishes, and announced with flair, she knew one thing for sure. This dinner wasn't about understanding. It was about reminding her quietly, but clearly, "You're not what we pictured for him. You never will be." And in that moment, Amira made a quiet promise. "You don't have to picture me. You'll remember me anyway." The dessert plates had just been cleared when Camille leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, the glint of her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's glow. The wine in her glass was nearly gone, her tone now, looser, her voice a shade louder than before. She glanced at Amira and gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have to say," she began, "your story is very compelling." Amira kept her gaze steady. "Thank you." Camille tilted her head, voice dripping with feigned interest. "You know the whole arising from the struggle arc. First in your family to go to college, working-class background, South End of Boston. It's a classic. Honestly, I've heard versions of it so many times it's starting to sound like a script." Vivian chuckled softly into her wine glass. Gerald said nothing. Marcus froze, shoulders tense. The table fell silent for a breath, just long enough for the insult to land. Amira blinked once, and then she stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw her napkin down or demand silence. She simply stood, calmly, her chair pushed back with a soft scrape, every movement precise, controlled. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, her posture firm, her expression unchanged. But her eyes burned. She looked at Camille first. "You think it sounds familiar?" she said, voice low and level, "because it's never been your life." Camille raised her brows in mock innocence. Amira didn't flinch. "You've heard it, yes. You've probably read it in college essays or seen it on the news when some poor kid gets into an Ivy. But you've never lived it. You've never had to work twice as hard to be called half as smart." She turned slightly, including the rest of the table. "You've never sat in a classroom where a professor assumed you were lost before you opened your mouth. You've never stood in line at a government office while someone behind the counter called you miss in a tone that meant you don't belong here. You've never watched someone look past your resume because your name doesn't sound like theirs." Her voice did not tremble. It didn't need to. Vivian slowly set her fork down. Gerald looked mildly uncomfortable but still said nothing. Amira turned her focus back to Camille. You think the story is tired. You think it's overused. You think it's a cliché." She leaned in just slightly, her eyes locked. "It's not tired for the people still living it, for the kids walking past liquor stores and eviction notices on their way to school, for the parents working double shifts because their kids can't afford to fail, for the girls who are told to tone it down because being smart and black is threatening." Camille looked away. But Amira wasn't finished, and let's be honest, the part that really bothers you isn't that I made it. It's that I made it here, to your table, to your brother's life, with my hair up in a bun and my name on a diploma and my voice on a stage. Marcus looked up at her, his face full of something between shock and admiration. "You don't think I'm unqualified. You just don't like that people are listening to me. You don't like that someone who doesn't look like you has the spotlight." Vivian's smile had disappeared. Her lips were pressed together in a hard line. Gerald cleared his throat, then stopped. Amira exhaled slowly and glanced down for a moment. When she looked up again, her voice was softer but firmer. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I was going to let it go like I've let it go 100 times before. But every time someone like me stays silent, it gives someone like you permission to keep talking." The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made people shift in their seats and avoid eye contact. And that was when Amira turned to Marcus. His eyes met hers. "I love you," she said plainly, "but I can't keep sitting quietly while they dress up their prejudice in politeness." Marcus swallowed, nodded once, and reached for her hand. She let him take it. She looked back at the table. "I didn't come here to prove myself. I don't need your approval. I came because he matters to me. And I thought that might be enough for you to see me. Really see me. But clearly, I expected too much." Camille opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. Vivian stared at her napkin, folding it and refolding it with small, twitchy fingers. Amira sat down, not because she was finished, because she was done. Done being polite in the face of veiled insults. Done pretending the room didn't smell like disapproval. Done trying to be digestible for people who had already decided she didn't belong. The silence lingered for another beat. Then Marcus spoke, voice firmer than it had been all night. "She's right." Vivian looked at him, startled. "She's right," he repeated. "You all say you're just asking questions. You say you're being realistic. But what you're really doing is trying to find a way to make her feel small." "She's being dramatic," Vivian said flatly. "No," Marcus said. "She's being honest. You don't like her because she doesn't fit your idea of who I'm supposed to be with. And frankly, I'm ashamed it took me this long to see it." Gerald spoke up then, his voice calm but cold. "Son, no one here is attacking her." Marcus shook his head. "That's the problem. You think unless it's loud or angry, it's not harmful. But it is. It is." Amira didn't say another word. She didn't need to, because the weight of truth had already done the damage. No raised voice, no shouting match, just facts, delivered with clarity. And for the first time that night, the Fairchilds had nothing left to say. Camille sat back, arms folded, eyes cast downward. Vivian looked like she was trying to find a new angle, but none came. And Gerald, for once, looked unsure. The waiter returned with dessert menus. No one opened them. Amira looked around the table and let herself breathe. Deep, slow. She had spoken. She had not bent. She had not smiled through it. And that silence, the heavy-weighted silence they sat in now, that was the sound of something cracking. For the first time, they had been made to see their reflections, and they didn't like what stared back. The tension at the table was thick enough to silence forks and freeze the chatter of nearby diners. After Amira's sharp yet composed takedown of Camille's patronizing comments, no one seemed eager to speak. Even the waiter who had just arrived with the dessert menu hesitated and quietly backed away, sensing the air had shifted. Vivian's wine glass rested untouched. Gerald stared at the candle in the center of the table, like it held answers. Camille fiddled with her napkin, folding and unfolding it with jittery hands. Marcus leaned forward, still gripping Amira's hand under the table, his thumb brushing hers in small, nervous circles. And then, as if choreographed by fate, a familiar voice approached from behind. Amira Bennett. Everyone turned. Professor Elaine Carver stood just to the side of their table. She was dressed in a tailored navy blazer, a silver pin on her lapel in the shape of a gavel. Her hair, white and perfectly slicked back, shimmered under the restaurant's chandelier. Her presence drew attention without effort. Conversations paused around them. Amira stood instinctively. "Professor Carver," she said, her voice calm, but her chest tightened. She hadn't seen her since the graduation ceremony. Elaine's smile was small, respectful, but purposeful. I wasn't planning to intrude, she said, glancing briefly at the Fairchilds, but I couldn't leave without telling you something in person. Gerald leaned back in his seat, curious but wary. Vivian kept her chin high guarded. Amira tried to maintain her composure. Of course. What is it? Elaine folded her hands in front of her. I just stepped away from a dinner with the managing partner at Keswick and Roth. Vivian blinked. Camille's eyes lifted from her napkin. Elaine continued, her tone steady. They've been following your academic record and public service work since your first year. Your name has come up more than once, but your speech today sealed it for them. Amira's breath caught. Elaine smiled a little wider now. They would like to offer you an associate position, senior track, clear path to partner, starting immediately after bar passage. For a second, the only sound was the gentle clink of silverware from a nearby table. Amira's lips parted, but no words came out. Elaine placed a hand on her shoulder. You earned it, every bit of it. Vivian's voice broke the silence. Keswick and Roth Elaine looked at her. That's right, they're very selective, Vivian said, adjusting her necklace. Yes, Elaine replied. They are. Camille blinked rapidly, glancing toward Marcus. That's the firm with the International Litigation Division, right? The one that took the tech monopoly case last year. Elaine nodded. Among others, they also lead the country in pro bono housing justice efforts. Amira's work has already aligned with their mission. Gerald frowned. And you're sure that she's the right one? Amira looked at him now. Elaine didn't hesitate. I'm sure. There was no hesitation on their end either. They told me she represents the next generation of legal leadership and equity. Vivian spoke again slowly. Perhaps they've confused her work with someone else. Amira hasn't clerked at any of the federal courts yet. Elaine narrowed her eyes slightly. No confusion. I personally recommended her. She was top of her class. She argued circles around seasoned externs. And more than that, she has what most lawyers don't, the ability to make people care about the law. Camille's voice was barely above a whisper. Wow. Elaine turned back to Amira. We'll follow up officially tomorrow, but I thought you should know tonight. Congratulations. Amira nodded, finally finding her voice. Thank you, Professor. Truly. Elaine glanced back at the table. Have a good evening. Then she turned and walked away. The silence that followed was different from before. Not heavy with tension, but thick with realization. Amira sat back down. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. She didn't look at Vivian, or Gerald, or Camille. She didn't need to. They were already looking at her, but not with curiosity or concern now, with disbelief. Marcus exhaled slowly. You deserve that. Every bit of it. Vivian reached for her glass, her tone still clipped. Well, that's impressive. Amira didn't respond. Gerald leaned forward, trying to maintain control. That firm is highly competitive. It's rare for them to make early offers like that. They've made exceptions before Camille offered, maybe for the sake of optics. Marcus turned toward her sharply. Don't. Camille flinched. Vivian placed her glass back on the table a little too forcefully. I just think we should be cautious. Sometimes early success can be overwhelming, and people often struggle to maintain it. Amira finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured. You're still trying to explain it away. Vivian raised her chin. I'm not, you are, Amira said steady. You're searching for a reason why someone like me got chosen, why it wasn't someone you know, someone you approve of, someone who fits the picture. Camille looked down. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it again. Amira leaned forward slightly. Her tone didn't rise, but her words sharpened. I don't owe you comfort. I don't owe you proof. I don't need your belief to validate my success. Vivian's lips thinned. Amira's gaze moved across the table. This offer didn't happen because I was lucky. It happened because I showed up again and again and did the work. Because I earned respect even from people who didn't look like me. And because I never let rooms like this convince me I didn't belong in them. She stood again, not out of anger, but because it felt right. I've spent years having my intelligence questioned, having my drive doubted, being told in subtle ways that I'm too bold, too much, too different. Her eyes locked on Vivian. I'm not too much. I'm just not afraid to take up space. The table remained silent. A nearby couple glanced their way, clearly sensing the energy in the air. Amira reached for her purse. I appreciate dinner, she said, but I have somewhere to be. Marcus stood with her instinctively. She turned to him, gently touching his arm. I need to walk out of here on my own. He nodded. As she stepped away, she didn't look back. Not even once. She didn't need them to say congratulations. She didn't need their respect. She had hers. And the truth. It looked a lot like her walking out of a restaurant that once tried to shrink her, holding her head high while the people at the table scrambled to figure out how they'd missed what was in front of them all along. Success doesn't need validation. It just needs to be seen. The silence left behind in Amira's wake was suffocating. She had walked away from the table minutes earlier, heels echoing against the marble floor of ornettes, her posture tall, her dignity untouched. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't even glance over her shoulder. She'd said what needed to be said, and she left them with the wreckage. Now, Marcus stood alone. His family remained seated. No one moved. No one spoke. Camille stared at the untouched creme brulee in front of her spoon, resting unused. Vivian's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the napkin on her lap, trying to smooth the wrinkles out of something that was already broken. Gerald shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight but motionless. Marcus looked at each of them slowly. His chest rose and fell in a pattern that had become less patient, less calm. What had once been restrained discomfort was now full-blown fury, and it was barely holding back behind his pressed lips. He pushed his chair back. It scraped against the floor with a sound that turned a few nearby heads. He didn't care. He stood. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "If you can't respect the woman I love," he said, his eyes locked on his parents, "then don't include me in your holiday dinners. Don't invite me to your galas. Don't expect me to show up for Christmas or Easter or birthdays." Vivian blinked. Marcus. He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to signal that he was done giving her chances. "No. Listen." The table stilled. "I've watched the way you talked to her. I heard the tone, the way you dressed up your questions to sound harmless. I've seen how you smile when you don't mean it, how you bring up other women like she's a phase I'll grow out of." Camille opened her mouth, but Marcus didn't even glance at her. "I've been quiet for too long. I've let you make her feel like an outsider while pretending it was just curiosity or concern. I've made excuses for you because you're my family." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "But tonight I saw it clearly. You don't see her. You see a problem I brought to your table." Vivian's hands were clasped tightly, now knuckles pale. "Marcus, this is not how it is." He cut in firm. "It is exactly how it is." He looked down at the table, then back at them. "She's the most remarkable person I've ever met. She worked for everything she has. She never asked you to accept her, but you should have. You had every chance." Gerald finally spoke, voice low. "Son, this doesn't need to be a dramatic scene." Marcus stared at him. "No, Dad. It needs to be real. For once." He took a breath. It wasn't just anger anymore. There was grief there, too. Grief for the family he had believed was better than this. "I'm not asking you to like her. I'm not even asking you to understand her. I'm telling you, if you can't respect her fully openly without conditions, then I won't pretend we're okay anymore." Camille looked away. Vivian's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Gerald looked at the floor. Marcus shook his head, disappointed, but calm. Then he stepped back. "I'm leaving." Vivian's voice rose faintly. "Marcus, please, you're overreacting." He didn't answer. He turned and walked away. And for the first time that night, the silence wasn't heavy because of what hadn't been said. It was heavy because the truth had finally been spoken. Amira stood outside near the valet stand, the breeze catching the edges of her dress as she stared into the night. She held her clutch tightly in one hand, her other arm wrapped loosely around her waist. She wasn't crying. She didn't need to. She'd done that before in college dorm rooms and courthouse bathrooms in the back rows of lecture halls after being talked over for the third time in one day. But tonight, she wasn't crying because she hadn't been alone. She had spoken her truth. And then Marcus had done something she hadn't expected. He stood. He chose her. Not quietly. Not with some half-hearted defense. He made a choice out loud, in public, in front of the people who raised him. And that mattered. The glass doors behind her opened and footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn. She felt him before she saw him. Marcus stopped beside her. She looked up. Their eyes met. And then without saying a word, he wrapped his arms around her. Amira melted into the hug, her forehead resting against his chest. That's when it happened. The tears. Not from pain, not from defeat, but from something far rarer. Relief. Validation. Love that showed up when it counted. She pulled back slightly, blinking away what she could. Marcus cupped her face gently. "I should have said something sooner," he whispered. "I should have stood up for you from the start." She didn't speak. She just looked at him. "I don't care what they think," he continued. "I don't care what it costs. You are my future. And if they can't handle that, they can stay in the past." Her hands gripped his wrists steady. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to smile. A real one. One built from truth, from pain, from strength, and now from hope. Because love like this wasn't about gestures. It wasn't about who bought the wine or wore the right dress. It was about who stood with you when you were being torn apart. And tonight, Marcus stood. Not behind her, not beside her afraid. He stood in front of his family. And in that moment, he became the partner she needed. Not perfect, but present. And willing to grow. Across the street, the lights from the restaurant glowed through the glass like a mirage. Amira and Marcus stood just beyond its reach, wrapped in the quiet of their decision. Together, whole, and ready for whatever came next. 1 year later, the Fairchild name no longer rang with quiet prestige. What used to be whispered with admiration in country clubs and corporate lounges had become the subject of headlines and hushed conversations. The family's investment firm, Fairchild Holdings, had been blindsided by a massive real estate lawsuit that exposed years of shady development partnerships and discriminatory housing practices. The kind of scandal that even expensive lawyers and legacy connections couldn't sweep under the rug. The same families that once praised Gerald Fairchild for his vision now avoided him at galas. The same law partners who once took Camille's calls in seconds now routed her to voicemail. And Vivian, always poised, always composed, had begun to avoid public events altogether. They didn't fall overnight. It had started with an expose in the Boston Ledger, a well-sourced article detailing how Fairchild Holdings had quietly partnered with landlords known for discriminatory leasing practices. The article revealed emails, internal memos, and even audio recordings from investor meetings. By the time the state's attorney general announced a formal investigation, their damage control efforts were already too late. Vivian sat in the sunroom of the family estate, phone in hand, but it hadn't buzzed in hours. Her tea had gone cold. Outside, the early spring wind stirred the garden she once hosted fundraisers in. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms folded. He had just returned from the city, where Amira's firm had successfully argued another case defending tenants wrongfully evicted under a redevelopment scam, ironically one that involved a subsidiary previously funded by Fairchild Holdings. He didn't gloat. He just stood there quiet, watching his mother, who had once questioned whether Amira was the right fit for their future. Vivian glanced at him. He didn't smile. She looked back at her phone. "They're saying we could lose majority control by summer," she said flatly. "If the city cuts the development contracts, the board may force your father out." Marcus didn't respond. "You think we deserve this?" He tilted his head slightly. "I think people deserve accountability." Vivian's voice dropped. "Even your family." He stepped forward. "Especially them." Meanwhile, across the city, Amira sat in a packed auditorium in downtown Boston, the soft glow of the projector lighting her face. She had just stepped down from the panel after delivering a keynote address at the Massachusetts Legal Equity Forum. Her topic, institutional redlining and modern discrimination in zoning laws. She had walked to the podium to a polite applause. She left it to a standing ovation. Lawyers from New York, Chicago, even D.C. waited in line just to shake her hand. Her reputation had grown case by case, speech by speech. She had made partner early. She was now one of the youngest senior litigators at Keswick and Roth, specifically in their civil rights and housing justice division. But more than that, she had become a name people respected in rooms where they once didn't even notice her. She wasn't the diversity scholarship student anymore. She was a force, and people were watching. Camille sat alone in her downtown condo, watching the replay of Amira's forum speech on her tablet. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, her hair tied up messily, far from the curated image she used to present on social media. A year ago, she would have rolled her eyes at a talk like this. Now, she couldn't stop watching. She paused the video just before Amira said, "Discrimination doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and calls itself market efficiency." Camille stared at the screen, lips parted. There it was, truth. And this time she wasn't looking away. Gerald had his own reckoning. In the boardroom of what was left of Fairchild Holdings, he sat across from attorneys who now worked for him, not with him. One of the state regulators brought in as part of a compliance agreement cited Amira's name during the meeting. "She's the one who forced your partner at Larkwood to release the internal equity data. That's what tied you to the targeting of minority tenants in Dorchester." Gerald said nothing. The lawyer continued. If it hadn't been for her litigation strategy, this might have stayed quiet. Gerald stared at the table. He wasn't angry. He was stunned, because deep down he knew. He remembered that dinner a year ago, remembered doubting her credentials, brushing her off, calling her idealistic. Now, her name was on the lips of regulators, judges, and attorneys general. She wasn't the woman who didn't belong. She was the woman who brought the system to its knees. Back at home, Marcus watched Amira return from her evening meeting. She tossed her keys on the counter, slipped off her shoes, and gave him a tired smile. He wrapped his arms around her without a word. "Long day?" he asked softly. She nodded against his chest. "But a good one." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "They're talking about you everywhere." She shrugged, a little bashful. "Let them." He smiled, then paused. "My mom asked about you today." Amira raised an eyebrow. "Did she?" He nodded, said she watched the city council hearing, said you were composed. Amira didn't laugh, but her lips curled ever so slightly. "That's code for still black but articulate." Marcus sighed. "Probably." She walked over to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. She ever going to say the words Amira asked, not facing him? Marcus leaned against the counter. "I don't know," he said, "but I think, for the first time, she's starting to see who you are." Amira turned around slowly. "I never needed her to see me," she said, "but it would have meant something if she tried before everything fell apart." He nodded. "She doesn't deserve your grace," he added, "but I think you give it anyway." Amira looked down at the counter, then back up at him. Her voice was calm. "Sometimes people have to lose everything before they realize who they should have trusted." Across town, Vivian sat in her bedroom. She had replayed Amira's speech 3 times that week, not because she wanted to admire her, not at first, but something kept gnawing at her. She remembered what she said about Amira not being the right fit. She remembered what it felt like when her son said, "I'm done." Now she saw Amira's face on the cover of legal journals, heard her name on the radio, saw her quoted in editorials about reforming city housing codes. Vivian had spent a lifetime surrounding herself with the right people, and not one of them had come to her defense when her name started sinking. But the girl she once dismissed, she was now the reason change was happening. And Vivian finally realized something she had spent years avoiding. Amira hadn't been a mistake. She had been the mirror, and what it reflected wasn't flattering. Vivian reached for her phone. She opened a new message. Typed, "Amira, I saw your speech. I was wrong." She stared at it, then deleted it. She wasn't ready yet, but for the first time she wasn't pretending anymore. And sometimes the first crack in pride is where the light finally gets in. The stage lights were bright, but Amira stood without blinking. Behind her, the screen read, "National Forum on Housing Equity and Racial Justice." To her left, 6 panelists, professors, nonprofit leaders, former city planners, sat quietly listening. In front of her, rows of attendees filled the Marriott Conference Hall in D.C., from junior policy staffers to mayors and members of Congress. Some were scribbling notes. Others just watched, arms folded, waiting for a reason to care. Amira gave them one. Zoning, she said, is not just about where buildings go. It's about who gets to dream and who has to move. She didn't read from notes. She spoke from years of experience, years of watching families evicted under the cover of redevelopment, and neighborhoods divided by invisible lines that had everything to do with race and class. Redlining may not be written in today's policies, but its spirit lives on in how we regulate land, how we fund schools, how we decide who's good for the neighborhood. A few heads nodded in the back rows. Amira's voice held steady, but the weight of the moment pressed against her chest. This wasn't just a speech. It was a platform she had earned the hard way, and she knew exactly who was listening. The cameras, the policy wonks, the news outlets, and somewhere out there maybe even the Fairchilds. She didn't say their name. She didn't need to. Backstage, after the panel ended, Amira stepped into the hallway to breathe. Her blazer clung lightly to her back, the warmth of adrenaline still fading. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. A text from Camille. "I watched the live stream. You were powerful. I'm sorry. Really sorry. I was wrong about you about so much. I'm still learning. Thank you for not giving up on people like me." Amira stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, "Thanks for reaching out. Learning matters. Let's keep talking." She hit send. It wasn't a clean resolution, but it was real. And real was enough. 2 hours later, back at her hotel room, Amira sat at the edge of the bed, laptop open, emails piling in. One caught her eye. Subject: zoning equity request to connect from Gerald.Fairchild at fairchildholdings.com. She paused, then opened it. Amira, I've been reviewing case materials and revisiting our past decisions. It's become clear to me that we missed perspectives that should have been central from the start. I would be grateful for the opportunity to meet, learn, and better understand your approach to zoning equity and community-led development. Respectfully, Gerald Fairchild. She read the message twice. Gerald Fairchild, the same man who once scanned her like she was a resume lacking credentials, who questioned her work over dinner while hiding it behind compliments about her passion, who didn't say a word the night Marcus stood up and walked away. Now he wanted to talk, not to argue, to learn. Amira exhaled. She didn't know if it was growth or damage control, but she'd seen what silence had cost people like her for generations. Maybe this was a start. She clicked reply. Happy to schedule a time. I believe learning is a choice. Let's see what you're willing to unlearn. She didn't expect an email from Vivian, and she didn't get one. In the months since the Fairchild downfall, Vivian had remained publicly quiet. No statements, no appearances, not even a quote in the Boston Globe when Gerald stepped down from the board. But Amira knew silence could speak louder than apology. Vivian wasn't ready, and maybe she never would be. But Amira had stopped waiting for the apology that might never come, because growth wasn't a favor someone gave you. It was a choice they had to make for themselves. Later that evening, Amira curled up on the couch beside Marcus in their apartment feet, tucked under her a bowl of popcorn on the coffee table between them. He was scrolling through Twitter on his phone. "You're trending," he said, grinning. She raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad, it depends on whether you're a city planner or a hedge fund." He smirked. She laughed, the sound soft but full. Then her face settled. Camille texted. He looked over. "Yeah, she's trying. She wants to keep talking." Marcus nodded slowly. "I believe she is. She's got a lot to unlearn." "So did I," he said quietly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic moment, just warmth. A different kind of victory. One built on conversations that felt awkward and slow. One built on people willing to ask questions instead of hiding behind tradition. Outside, the lights of D.C. shimmered in the distance. Amira's phone buzzed again, another email from a city councilwoman in Atlanta asking her to consult on a new inclusionary zoning policy. She smiled. This was what she had fought for, not just a seat at the table, but a say in how the table was built. People often thought victory looked like applause headlines or winning a case. But Amira had learned that real victory was subtler. It looked like someone swallowing their pride and sending an email they never thought they'd write. It looked like a sister texting, "I was wrong." It looked like your partner's father asking to understand rather than dismiss. And yes, it also looked like your name being mentioned in rooms that once acted like you didn't exist. She got up from the couch, walked to the window, and stared out at the lights below. Marcus followed, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, but it's not over." He kissed the top of her head. "No, but now you're not fighting alone." She closed her eyes for a moment, let herself feel it. The justice, the fight, the fatigue, the hope. Because victory hadn't been the end. It had just been the door. And on the other side, the work was only just beginning. The sun was slipping behind the Boston skyline, casting a soft orange glow over the Charles River. The footpath along the river was quiet, except for the occasional sound of runners and the rhythmic splash of rowing teams out in the distance. Amira and Marcus walked slowly side by side, not speaking yet, just being. The past year had taught them how valuable silence could be when it wasn't loaded with tension, but filled with understanding. Marcus's hand brushed lightly against hers. She took it without hesitation. Their steps were in sync. Marcus glanced sideways, then stopped walking. Amira stopped too, facing him. His expression was serious, but not heavy. There was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He took a breath. "I've been relearning what it means to be a man," he said. "Not just for me. For you. For the world I want to help build. And I'm not there yet, but I want to be worthy of you. Fully." Amira didn't answer right away. She looked at him. Really? Looked at him. The way his shoulders no longer curled under pressure from his family. The way he showed up to her events not just as support, but as someone engaged, asking questions, reading articles. She'd recommend connecting the dots on his own. He had changed, not to please her, but to stand beside her. That, she said quietly, means more than you know. He smiled a little, then looked down. "I've been thinking," he continued. "We've talked about giving back mentoring community work, but what if we start something bigger?" Amira raised an eyebrow. "A scholarship," he said, "for black students pursuing law. In your name." She blinked. His voice was steady. "The Amira Bennett Scholarship. For every kid who had to fight to be heard the way you did." Her chest tightened, not from emotion she couldn't handle, but from the fullness of it, from knowing someone had truly seen her. She tried to speak, but had to swallow first. "That's big," she finally said. Marcus nodded. "We'll get some friends from the firm involved. Fundraising partnerships. We start small. 1 or 2 students a year. Then we grow." Amira exhaled slowly, still taking it in. "I love that," she whispered. "I love the name even more." He grinned. They resumed walking, but slower this time. She leaned into him just slightly, her head resting briefly on his shoulder before pulling back. Then her tone shifted more thoughtful, a little heavier. "There's something else we should talk about." Marcus glanced at her. "What's that, your family?" He stiffened for half a second, but not in the old way. Not with fear, with weariness. Amira continued, "I know what they did. I know what they didn't do. And I'll never forget how you stood up that night." He nodded, but she added, "I also know what it means to carry bitterness, to let silence harden into resentment." He didn't respond yet. His jaw flexed slightly. Amira stopped walking again, turning to face him fully. "I'm not asking you to excuse them. I'm saying maybe it's time to start something. A conversation. An invitation." Marcus looked at her conflicted. "They hurt you." She nodded. "They did. But you're asking me to reach out." "I'm asking you," she said gently, "to be the bigger person when you're ready. Because healing doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing not to let it define everything moving forward." He sighed, then sat down on a nearby bench facing the river. Amira followed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I hate what they did. I hate that I didn't see it sooner. I know. But maybe you're right," he said slowly. "Maybe some people need the invitation to try better this time." Amira nodded. "Even if they fumble it, they'll know the door was open." He turned to her. "You'd forgive them." She didn't answer immediately. "I'd start by listening." "That's more than I got before." He reached for her hand again. "Then I'll do it," he said. "For us. For the life we're building." She smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet. Grown. Back home that night, Marcus pulled out his laptop and began typing a short email to his father. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple message. "I'm open to talking. One-on-one. If you're willing to meet me where I am now." He didn't copy his mother. He didn't text Camille. Just this. Step 1. In the living room, Amira opened her notebook and began sketching the first framework of the scholarship fund. She scribbled names of people they could reach out to, the law professors who had once supported her, the non-profit networks she'd grown close with. At the top of the page, she wrote in block letters, "The Amira Bennett Scholarship Fund." Then beneath it, "For every brilliant mind they almost overlooked." They weren't the same people who met under ivy-covered arches 4 years ago. They had been tested by bias, by loss, by silence, by pride. And now, love looked different. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. It was full of patience and choice. And the kind of partnership that came not from fairy tale beginnings, but from standing in the fire and choosing to stay together. The gymnasium at Easton High smelled just like Amira remembered. Polished hardwood faded banners and something faintly metallic in the air, like old lockers and determination. The folding chairs were packed with students. Teachers stood along the walls. A few parents had filtered in from the back. The stage was makeshift, a portable riser with a podium and a single microphone. No spotlight, just fluorescent lights overhead humming gently. Amira stood behind the mic in a navy blue pantsuit, hair pulled into her signature high bun. She didn't need a script. She didn't need flash. The moment was enough. She scanned the crowd. The faces were young, 15, 16, 17 years old, but already weathered by things they shouldn't have had to carry. She took a breath. "When I was your age," she began, "I used to sit right over there, 3rd row from the back. I never raised my hand in civics class, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wasn't sure anyone cared what I had to say." A few heads nodded. She continued, "There were teachers who saw me, and there were others who didn't, who assumed that because I had free lunch and a zip code like this one, my future would be small, contained, predictable." She paused. Her voice was steady, but there was weight behind it. "They weren't afraid I'd fail. They were afraid I'd succeed." A murmur moved through the students. Because if someone like me, black female from South End, could win arguments in courtrooms and change housing policy, then what would that say about the excuses they'd made all their lives? Silence. Listening. They weren't scared I'd be wrong, she said, her voice growing firmer. They were scared I'd be right and not look like them. That landed. There it was, the sentence she'd carried in her heart since the day she got her first rejection from an internship that called her too direct. Since that dinner with the Fairchilds. Since every moment she'd been told to slow down to make people more comfortable, to not be so intense. A slow clap started somewhere near the front. A teacher, then a few students. Then the room joined. Amira didn't bask in it. She just stood still, letting it roll past her like wind over stone. After the applause faded, she smiled genuinely. Then she opened the floor. Any questions? A few hands went up. She nodded to a boy in the fourth row. He stood, about 17. Tall, thin, nervous, but holding it together. He looked her in the eye. How did you survive it, he asked. Like, all the judgment. The people who didn't want you to win, there it was. The real question. Amira didn't rush to answer. She let the pause breathe. Then she stepped out from behind the podium. I didn't survive it by being stronger than everyone, she said. I survived it because I stopped measuring myself by what they thought. The boy listened, frozen in place. I remembered that my value was never supposed to come from their approval, that my worth wasn't in their eyes. It was in the way I stood tall when everything around me tried to shrink me. She looked around the room now, not just at him. I learned to stand. That's how I made it. Not because they let me, but because I refused to ask for permission. He sat down slowly, his head still nodding. Amira returned to the mic. Some of you will leave here and here now more times than you can count. You'll walk into rooms where you're the only one who looks like you. You'll hear people try to compliment you by calling you articulate. You'll feel like you have to explain why you belong. She paused. Don't. You belong because you are, not because you convince them. Another hand went up, then another. Amira answered a few more questions. One about scholarships, one about imposter syndrome, one about what kept her going when she felt alone. Finally, the school bell rang. She smiled, giving a small bow. Thank you. Keep showing up. Keep standing tall. Applause followed her all the way off stage. Backstage, Amira gathered her notes, though she hadn't used them once. Her hands were steady, but her heart was full. Marcus was already waiting near the side exit, leaning casually against the brick wall, hands in his coat pockets. He wore a dark sweater and jeans, but it wasn't what he wore that caught her eye. It was the way he looked at her. Like she was still the same woman who first argued her way into his heart, but bigger now, more complete. She walked toward him. He held out a hand. She took it. No words at first, just the warmth between their palms. You were brilliant, he finally said. I meant every word, she replied. I know you did. They stepped out into the cool air. The late afternoon sun was soft, painting the sidewalks gold. They walked in silence for a minute, her hand still in his. Then he said, You made that kid believe something today. Amira smiled. That's the point. I don't need to light the whole world. Just enough for someone behind me to see the next step. Marcus kissed the back of her hand, then squeezed it. You're doing that. Every day. They stopped at a street corner before the lot where they'd parked. Amira looked back at the school building. It looked smaller than she remembered, but something in her heart told her that was the truth of it. She hadn't outgrown the place. She had simply stepped into who she was meant to be. And the fire inside her, it hadn't burned out. Not when they doubted her. Not when they excluded her. Not even when they tried to pretend she didn't matter. It still burned now, quietly, unshakably. And the people who needed that fire, young, unseen, unheard, were watching. They didn't need her to be perfect, just real, just steady, just there. Because not everyone needs you to be the light. But someone out there, they're waiting for it. And when they see it, they'll follow it forward. The story of Amira wasn't just about success or standing up to prejudice. It was about learning to stay true to your values, even when the world tells you to shrink. It reminded us that strength doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the way you keep showing up. It's the way you choose dignity over and over again. And maybe in some way we've all been Amira, questioned, underestimated, or left out of the frame. But her journey shows us that even in the silence, even when the lights go off, the fire inside us can still burn steady. What about you? Have you ever been told you don't belong? Have you ever had to find your voice when no one was listening? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments, because someone out there might need your light too. If this story touched you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need encouragement today, and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey of truth, justice, and healing. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.